In this lesson, you'll be learning about the two different types of data that we study in statistics. It's really important to know which type of data that you're studying so that you can decide what type of chart best suits the data, and also the types of things that you can find based on the type of data that it is. Basically, it sums down to there's two types of data. There's qualitative and quantitative. You might hear qualitative named categorical, but they mean the same thing. So it just kind of depends on which textbook you're using. A variable is a characteristic that varies from subject to subject or person to person. So variable means change. So what is different from each subject to each subject? So for example, in our variables, we have quantitative and qualitative, and quantitative variables are numerical data. And in quantitative variables, there's discrete variables and continuous variables. Discrete variables are like whole numbers. This pen's a little thick. Make it a little smaller. There we go. And continuous are basically like decimals, anything that can be expressed as a decimal or fraction. And then, for example, in a discrete variable, if we were asking how many TVs you have in your household, you're not going to have half a TV. You're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, however many TVs you have, TVs in your house. So those are whole numbers. They're like entire units. Or how many people you have in each of your classes. There's not half of a person, everyone's a whole person. So those are discrete pieces, discrete variables. And then a continuous variable is anything that can be expressed as a decimal. So anything that has to do with weight, time, temperature, anything like that, anything that's a height, decimal, or fraction is continuous. And then qualitative or categorical are non-numerical. Whoops. Now, my wording here can get tricky because there are situations where numbers are describing a category, so we just have to be careful with that, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And then binary means, or bi means two, so a binary categorical variable means that there's only two options or two possibilities. And I have a little tree diagram here of our types of variables. There's two types of variables, qualitative or quantitative, and then I have some examples of these variables. So in qualitative variables, for example, you can have brand of a PC. Brand is a name, which is non-numerical. Marital status, you can be married, single, divorced, widowed. Those are names. Those are characteristics that are non-numerical. And then hair color. Colors are names, so those are non-numerical. And then in quantitative variables, we have the two types, discrete and continuous. Discrete, I've already kind of talked about a little bit. There are those whole units. Children in the family, strokes on a golf hole, TV sets owned. And then continuous, amount of income tax paid. Usually there's like a, 50 cents or 51 cents or 53 cents, not 50 necessarily, but there's those cents, that decimal. Or weight of a student. Sometimes a person is not necessarily an even 100 pounds. They might be 100.5 or 100.8. And then yearly rainfall. Rainfall is usually gathered in inches, and those inches can be expressed in decimals. So there's some examples of that. I have two examples down here where you're going to try it. You're going to pause the video and try to decide which type of variable you think that it is. So go ahead and do that. Hopefully you paused it and came back. And in the first one, it says humans have one of the four types of blood, A, B, AB, or O. What type of variable is this? Is it numerical? Is blood type numerical or non-numerical? Blood type is categorized by these letters, which make it qualitative. And it didn't ask, but this would not be binary because there's 4 different choices. In the right one, it's asking household size. So basically, how many people are in your household. This is going to be quantitative because we're going to be giving numbers as our answers. And that is discrete because people are whole units. Each individual piece of data is called an observation, and the collection of observations is called a data set. So that's just some vocab for you. And then to end the video, I want you to try to come up with some examples of each of these, and then pause the video, try some examples, and then come back. I'm hoping you got some different variables than I got. I would imagine that you did. But here's some of the examples that I chose. An example of quantitative variable would be the temperature of each student that walks into the building. There was a time in life where we were taking the temperature of everyone that walked in, and so that would be a really easy variable to gather since it's done every day. Discrete variable, number of pants owned, jeans or whatever, shorts, whatever. Continuous variable, height of each student. And then qualitative would be maybe favorite restaurant. And binary would be maybe chocolate versus vanilla. Or if it came down to like 2 candidates and you were asked which one you were voting for, there's only, one of 2 answers. I will say, I don't think I had it in here. One of the things that I talked about earlier was that sometimes numerical data is actually qualitative. An example of that, a really popular example of that is zip codes. So if you ask someone what their zip code of their hometown is, that's numerical data. But if you think about, basically the question comes down to, if I took the mean, the average of this data set, zip codes, and I got a numerical answer, does that numerical answer make sense to the problem? So if I gathered everyone's zip codes and I found the average of all the zip codes, I'm going to get an answer, but that answer doesn't really give me meaningful information. So sometimes qualitative data is expressed in numbers, but it's still qualitative, because if you think of a zip code is actually in reference to the name of a region, or not the name, it's specifying a specific region, maybe a collection of cities, not necessarily one city, but if it's a specific region, then you can think of it, oh, it's because even though it's expressed in numbers, we're talking about, Stephenville or Dublin or Fort Worth or Dallas or Houston or whatever. So sometimes it includes these outer suburbs, smaller little areas, so that, a zip code is in anyway. So just be careful of that as you decide which type of variable you're working with. Think about, just ask yourself that question and you should be good to go. That's all I have for this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to help.